So, hi, Jacquette.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you for asking. And yourself?
I am doing well too.
Good. And
Yes.
you're what I love about you is that obviously I don't see you every day. I don't see you moment to moment, but as long as I have known you, and it's been years. I mean, we've been connected for years, even though we haven't seen each other in a while, but we've stayed connected, and I'm so happy about that. I
Yes.
remember exactly where we met, and I remember you having to run off because you were going to do a TV interview. Um, And what I have noticed about you is that you try really hard to is chosen because it's a choice
Mhm.
to move forward.
Mhm.
And that's one thing that has always stuck with me about you and something because I think you really champion that we're all resourceful in one way or another. We can make it work. We can find
Mhm.
even if we have to make choices that we don't like.
That is one of the things that I say all the time. I think that you don't always like the options, but the beautiful, powerful thing is that we have the ability to make a choice. So even if you don't like the options, the fact that you can choose from something
From
is a
some
really powerful thing. And I think that that is one of the things that we can lose sight of sometimes, but yet that's where our agency is.
Yeah. So this is Carbon Convos. It is April Literacy Month. So let's get into it, talking about money. So first of all, tell us what you do.
Before I tell you what I do, I would love to actually tell you why I don't like the word literacy attached to financial literacy.
Okay.
Um, by way of background, I have been in the industry since 1986. And so I am coming to my perspective around the term knowing what the intent of it was back in the 70s when the Community Reinvestment Act was created. So I won't get all wonky, but the short of it is it was for banks that were looking to go into certain neighborhoods. In order to be able to do that, they had to offer something to the community in which they were setting up shop, if you will. And so, providing financial literacy, helping people open accounts, helping people manage their money was what was offered. The problem is that it became something that was marketed to a certain group of people as if not everybody needs to know how to be better with their money, how to have a better relationship with their money. And I would argue that they really kind of missed the boat because folks who don't have much wiggle room, if they're off by $10, that being off by $10 can have significant impact. Clearly, my personal opinion aside, I'm not going to change, how we talk about financial literacy, but I really want people under the sound of my voice to really start to think about since language is so powerful, as you know, as a writer, if we can also just maybe think of it as financial education, if you will, or financial empowerment. And I don't actually think about me giving someone empowering someone. It's more about financial self-empowerment. So I just wanted to say that because I think it's important to understand my bias that I am bringing into the conversation in this month of financial literacy month that's celebrated, that someone decided we should have during this month. But in terms of answering the question of what do, I work as a financial behaviorist, and that is getting people to really understand that success with money is never just about the numbers, and it is deeply rooted in your history with money. And so that means looking at what's going on from a familial standpoint, a cultural standpoint, what is happening socially, politically, economically, and how that shows up in your behavior, in your attitudes about money, in your beliefs about money and the actions that you take or don't take. And I help people navigate that. I help people navigate that, whether it's for their personal finances or that in conjunction with their business. And I know we're going to talk about choices. And it is helping them navigate and negotiate the choices that they need to make, even sometimes when they don't like the options that are available to them.
Yeah. So one thing you talk about in your practice is, as you were saying, the behavior behind money. So emotions, beliefs, etc. What are some negative emotions or beliefs that can negatively impact one's finances?
So, we have a tendency, and I understand it because contrast is oftentimes how we think through things, but we have a tendency to say these emotions are negative and these emotions over here are positive. And I prefer if we were to actually look at it as along a continuum, because you can actually experience both ends of the spectrum regarding the very same transaction. And so when it comes to your emotions, one might say that you could feel powerful, you could feel confident. Another might say that they, feel shame or guilt about something. And then someone else might say that, they feel abundant. And another one might say they feel scarce or fear. And like I said, you can feel all of those things around the same transaction. Like think about somebody who bought a house recently. They're probably really proud of themselves for doing that. But then are also like, holy crap, if anything goes wrong, do I have enough to cover that? Like I'm thinking of someone in particular who does not even live in a flood zone, but spent several thousand dollars to flood proof their basement, and it did not work. And so the very next rainstorm, their basement was flooded. And so you buy a home and you think you're doing all of the right things, and then all these other expenses come up. So that feeling of excitement and being proud is offset now with frustration and anger. All of those are emotions. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
It touches upon it. I guess what I'm trying to get to is, what are some things that we can think about ourselves, or the money that we make, or our lack of education about money, that can have a negative impact on how we spend. And when I say negative impact, I mean spending too much on something that maybe you didn't need, or not knowing there was a better option, or making a choice that makes you lose money. What are some of the emotions and beliefs behind those kinds of decisions?
So before I get to that, I think what's important is before you can actually even begin to assess it, you actually have to have some data points. And so I am not someone who is like, oh, go create a budget. That's not me. But I am someone who highly recommends that people track. And one
Mhm,
of the things that you can track is, excuse me, not only when did you buy something, but what did you buy? How much did it cost?
mhm.
Was it a want or a need? And you're doing all of this without any judgment. But
Gotcha.
also,
That's
how
the
are you
hard part.
feeling? Would you say?
That's the hard part, not, at least for me, not judging myself for buying something that isn't a necessity.
But see, then it means unpacking where did that messaging come from?
Oh, I know where it came from.
Right. So, but it means unpacking that for other people who might have a similar feeling, and then figuring out, well, in those moments when I have that feeling again, what am I going to say to counter that? Because
Mhm.
that could very well be getting in your way. But back to what you're looking for when you're tracking is, what did you buy? When did you buy it? What did it cost? Was it something that was planned or unplanned? And what were you feeling in that moment? Were you celebrating because you submitted a writing and it was accepted? Or were you kind of appeasing a disappointment because you submitted something and it was rejected? And the whole point of just capturing it as if it is not you, but you're writing the information down, and so that you can go back and look and you can see patterns, and you can see, well, how often am I buying things that are unplanned versus planned? How often am I buying things from a place of joy versus a place of anger? And that can give you a great deal of insight around what kind of thing you might want to do moving forward. And the reason I suggest tracking is because you can't interrupt a pattern you don't notice.
Right.
And with tracking, you're collecting the data so that you have an idea of what that pattern is.
I have a pair of boots that I bought I don't even remember why I bought them, but I think I just needed some retail therapy. I have worn
Uh-huh.
them twice. And I remember that purchase. And so, going forward, I mean, I am an emotional shopper. I think a lot of us are. You
Mhm,
buy, but I mean, I try to stick to little things like, I'll buy a candle or something like that, just
mhm.
because I feel like buying something. And I think I do get that rush of endorphins when I've bought something. Um, and sometimes that feeling, I love the thing I bought for a long time. And sometimes that feeling fades very quickly. So, but I do try to think about why I'm purchasing something, even if it's something that I don't need. What is this, how is this going to serve me? And when I think about things like candles, I'm like, well, aromatherapy really does relax me. So that's kind of
Mhm.
how I justify it. I look at those, I kind of put them in the necessity column
Bucket.
in terms
Right,
of my overall well-being. But
right.
I try, but I, yeah, I do. I think about those things before I make a purchase. Even
Yeah,
if
and what you could do, it for someone who is tracking and they realize, oh, this is how much I spent this year or last year that fell into, more of an emotional purchase. What you can do is you can say, oh, well, you know what? That's my pattern. And last year I spent, just for illustrative purposes, $1,000. So then you create a bucket. And every single time you get paid, however you get paid, you put a little bit of money in there so that when you buy from an emotional place, you're actually not taking away necessarily from your current cash flow because you can replace it from that bucket that you have that is emotional spending.
And I also think that a lot of us who do treat ourselves, because I think treating yourself is important because I
Mhm,
have been on the other end where I felt completely financially deprived and couldn't buy a $12 t-shirt because, that was money for the train or, whatever
mhm.
it was. And then when you do get a little chunk of change, that deprivation can really devour you and you start spending money everywhere. And it's like,
Yeah.
you need to start cooking at home instead of, always eating out because now you can.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think, with what you've just described, the scenario that you've just described, the challenge is if you have deprived yourself so much for a really long period of time, when you do get that influx, it's kind of a natural tendency to then want to fill it all up. It's almost like the person who is an unhealthy dieter. And
mhm.
then they've deprived themselves of whatever it was that they were not eating while they're on this diet. And then something triggers them, and then they just gorge themselves with that exact same thing. And that happens when it comes to money too. And I think that when someone is looking to shift from a place of I've been operating this way out of necessity to
Right.
then shifting to a place of I have a little bit more abundance, I can operate differently. That's when it becomes even that much more critical to be really clear about what it is you want money to do for you. And so you don't necessarily have to be, prescriptive about it to the T, but that is when it's helpful to say, this is the job that I want for this pool of money. This is the job that I want this pool of money to do for me, so that you already know what you're going to do before the money actually is quote unquote in your hands.
So what I'm hearing from you is that money is work. Money, it takes
Mhm.
work to make money work for you. There has to be an intention behind it. If you want savings, etc.
Well, here's the thing, and this has been a core of my body, a core message of my body of work for a very, very long time. You have a relationship with money. And any relationship that you have that is of importance to you, you have to put in some work, right? You have a role, you have responsibilities, and so does the other end of the relationship, if you will. So, yeah, I think a lot of people have this notion that they don't have to do anything. No. You got to give money direction. You got to tell it what it is you want, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. So just like you have boundaries in other relationships in your life, you have to have boundaries when it comes to money too. And yeah, savings, that's a boundary. Investing, that's a boundary. Spending, that's a boundary. Earning, that too is a boundary. And you have to be clear and don't confuse clarity with certainty. It's not about being able to guarantee anything, but it is about being able to say, I want my money to do X for me. And here's where I am. And given that gap, that informs, well, what do you do today to help close that gap? So you have it absolutely is work. It is not a passive thing at all. And the more engaged you are with it, the better feedback it can give you around what you need to do next.
A lot of what you say is really impactful. And that's what I love about your approach to finances is that one, I think you're very empathetic. You're honest and you're
Mhm.
real, but I think you're very empathetic in your delivery because money is just it is a hard thing because of the emotions that are attached. I know that you also talk a lot about relationships, like when people, how they manage their money together and how those emotions and upbringing, those differences can really clash and be really challenging to deal with. So again, I've always appreciated your approach to helping people work through those types of, dynamics.
Yeah, one of the things that I say is your relationship with money will be one of the longest you have.
Yeah.
It's just true.
It's I feel it's stressful. Maybe that's not the word you would use, but
Well,
I feel like it's
I
stressful.
mean, there's stress and then there's stress. There's always going to be some simmering degree of stress.
Mhm.
If you are someone who is always looking for opportunities to grow and to have more,
Mhm.
because there's going to be a gap between what you have and what you need right now. Well, let me rephrase that. There's always going to be a gap between what you have and what it is that you're going to need to close the gap between where you are and where you want to be. To me, that's stress, but that's stress that is A, manageable, and B, is an invitation to grow, to be more creative, to be perhaps a little bit more strategic, to perhaps be a little bit more disciplined in areas where you need to do that. But then there is stress that is a bit overwhelming. And you know, PwC does an annual survey, and their 2023 survey speaks to how much stress people are under. And don't quote me precisely on the numbers, but I believe it is 47% of the people that they surveyed expressed feeling financial stress. And of that, 56% were so financially stressed that they were distracted. And they were distracted spending at least 3 hours per week at work dealing with whatever that financial stressor was. So financial stress is real.
Yeah.
But I also think that, you know, much like people want money to be quote unquote easy, how they want talking about money to be easy, I also think some people have this misguided notion that it should be stress-free. It's not stress-free. It is difficult to talk about. Uh, and it can be hard sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I just had my taxes done. Oh God. Every 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 year. I'm like, oh my God. Because it's hard. Because I typically, I try so that form that you fill out with your deductions, I asked people who teach accounting, and I still couldn't get answers that made sense in terms of how do I fill this out so that I don't owe. So at the time, I was working two jobs, a full-time job and a part-time job. I got it right with my full-time job, but I didn't get it right with I I tried with the part-time job, but I don't know what happened. So of course I owe. I just, at this point, I just brace myself for the numbers. I'm like, just tell me so I can deal with it.
Right.
But we're talking about tax time. First thing I want to talk about is if you get a little chunk of change, let's say you get a refund, what, and I know it's individual to each
Mhm.
person in terms of what their priorities are and what their needs are, but generally, um, do you have any recommendations for what someone should do? Should they save? Should they invest? Pay off bills? I know that one of your tenets is pay yourself first.
That is true, but what I wanna say is that I just wanna echo and reinforce that there is no one size fits all, right, answer. So, I can't sit here and say, "Oh, they should save, or they should do this, or they should do that." That said, um, I'm gonna share what I think is a good framework for helping someone back into answering the question of, well, what is the right choice for me in my current situation? And it's going to always start with, well, what are your goals?
Yeah.
Right? What are your timing of your goals? What's the financial component of your goals? What are you trying to address of that financial component right now, or within the next 6 months, or within the next year? So that's one aspect of it. What are your goals? The second piece is, what's your capacity?
Right.
Right? And we could think of your capacity in terms of your cash flow. What are the current cash flow slash capacity needs that you have? What do you anticipate may be the case in, future months? And that becomes really important for someone who doesn't have a job where they get paid the same amount with whatever the cadence is, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. So goals first, then capacity. And then the third piece would be, what do you need to do to kind of uh, find that balance between what's going to serve you in the short term and what's going to serve you in the long term? And I am a huge component of scenario planning and writing everything down. And this is a perfect opportunity to really kind of say, this is one scenario. These are, my first set of options that I can consider and think about. Here's the second set, and then here's the third, so that you can think through, well, what are the possible outcomes that may happen if I do this cascade, if I make this cascade of choices before you actually commit to a path.
Right.
And again, going back to what we said at the very beginning, even if you don't like any of the options or the end results of those, paths, those three paths, at least it puts you in a much better position to feel like you are in control
Yeah.
and being proactive, as opposed to being reactive and
Yeah.
like that's your only
When I
choice.
think about having to choose from an array of choices, like none of them feel good, I always say, okay, if I have to dance with the devil, I can at least pick the song. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, at least pick the song.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, it's tough. Like money, especially when you feel like you don't have enough, it's so hard.
Yeah. And I think when you don't feel like you have enough, this is going to sound so counterintuitive, but that is precisely when you need to do something that makes you feel like you do have enough. So even if it's the case that you're like, oh my God, I really can't afford this. Can you possibly give $1? Because it's not about the dollar amount, it's about the energy, and it's about what that does for you psychically to be able to say, I can let this go. And so I think um, giving in a very odd way is even that much more important when you don't feel like you have it to
Well,
give.
it was great to catch up with you. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye.
Bye.